G'day guys, and welcome to the first of my Duralast HGK Eurofighter build series. First off, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you for the hundreds of positive messages and comments I received on my Formula Drift budget video. I'm really glad you guys appreciate the amount of time and effort that goes into that style of video rather than just another driver vlog flexing a whole bunch of shiny new parts going onto a race car. Today, I thought I'd show you what actually happens when you're trying to build a race car in the middle of a global pandemic. What happened when I lost $350,000 worth of sponsorship deals in the first week of March this year when the whole coronavirus shutdown started to commence, and how I'm now trying to navigate this ship through those waters and get it back on track. There's a couple of ways to get your hands on a Eurofighter. One is to write HGK a check for around $250,000, wait 6 months and keep an eye on your mailbox. This is great if you're the Sultan of insert oil-rich country here. But for us mere mortals, it means it's time to roll up the sleeves, pound the phones to hustle some sponsors, and get ready for a whole lot of late and dirty nights in the workshop. Financially and logistically, the DIY approach definitely makes a lot more sense for me. I already have a workshop and a team in the US, and a lot of my sponsors are now also based in the United States. If you take, for example, Texas Speed, they build some of the finest LS engines in the world, and they're at 20 minutes down the road from my shop here. So for me, it makes way more sense to build the car here versus getting Texas Speed to build an engine, then ship it halfway around the globe to HGK in Latvia for them to then install the engine into the chassis and then ship it back to my shop here, which is only a few minutes away from where it started life. The other advantage is that having the same guys working on the car from start to finish means that I have multiple guys that are across all of the engineering decisions and mechanical decisions that went into building that chassis. That puts us in a lot stronger position when it comes to taking that car to the track and running it, having to do repairs in 5 minutes and things like that. Now, back to October 2019. My ute had just been involved in a bad crash at the Formula Drift season finale in Texas, but it was due at SEMA in Las Vegas just a couple of weeks later. I had AZ Manufacturing in Arizona machine a new knuckle for me, which with the time crunch meant I had to pick it up on my drive. On my arrival, fellow Formula Drift driver Brandon Sorensen very kindly offered up some shop space to me at his house, which I gratefully accepted, and I went about installing the new knuckle to get the car ready for a week of tyre-slaying debauchery with the guys at Hoonigan. While I was working on my ute at the Sorensens, I happened to get chatting to Brandon's dad Randy, and I told him my plans to build an E92. Amongst all of the amazing cars and trucks and motorbikes and dirt bike track and everything else they've got going on there, they happened to have an old shell that they didn't need anymore. So we agreed upon a price of $1,500. Brandon slung it up for me using the forklift, and we put it on my triple trailer that I'd rented to get out to the event, and I dragged it back to Texas. As I was about to leave, I asked Randy what happened to the original engine and gearbox for it. He replied it was going in the trash at his other workshop, about a 30-minute detour from my drive back to Texas, but I was welcome to it if I wanted it. I got the address, scooped it up, and headed for Austin. The good news was I flipped the old engine and gearbox on Facebook Marketplace for $600 when I got back, so it brought the total cost of the chassis down to $900. I ran it down to my mates at Gun Collision Center in San Antonio to laser align it and ensure everything was straight before I took it over to Apex Auto Works in Houston to get started on the roll cage and small bits of fabrication. The reason you laser align a chassis before putting the roll cage in it is because once you do, the amount of strength that gives the shell means that if you were to later find out it was bent, there's no going back. I dropped it off at Apex in Houston, but not before my truck blew a power steering pump, stranding me yet again on the side of the highway. Luckily my mates Jeff and Richard towed it the last few miles to the shop. I jumped on a bus, hightailed it back to Austin, and managed to make my flight back to Australia for Christmas with just a few minutes to spare. With the time difference of me being in Australia, it meant most of my vacation was spent with 2 and 3 a.m. phone calls back to the US trying to get all the parts together that we needed. One of the first ones to arrive was the incredible carbon fibre intake from Performance Design. It will undoubtedly be the centerpiece of the engine on top of the Texas Speed built motor. The base and runners are made from a glass-filled nylon polymer. They make it using this because it's lightweight and has a very low heat soak, which reduces intake temperatures. Next is removing the excess nylon flash and deburring from the moulding process. These are the foam core flanges used for the base of the top of the carbon fibre intake section. The billet mould is polished and sprayed with a mild adhesive, so the first layer of carbon stays in place and straight while laying up. In total, 5 layers of carbon are used. The whole process is called epoxy resin infusion. A vacuum is first pulled on the bag, and then the resin is allowed to enter and infuse the carbon fabric. After that's done, it's sealed and pressure is applied. There's 2 main types of mold used when making composite parts like this. One is what's called soft tooling, which is made from products like fiberglass. That's actually how we molded my original ute to make the carbon fiber body. These ones are a lot more expensive and made from billet, but the quality of the product and the number of pieces it can produce before needing replacement is far higher. When I returned to the US in early January, it was amazing to see that all those middle of the night phone calls from Australia had actually amounted to something, and there was a warehouse full of parts waiting for me. Originally, we'd planned to send the BMW back to my workshop in Austin on my return, but as there was still some work to finish up and 2 of my guys are based in Houston, we made the call to leave it there while I went to work in Minnesota with Texas Drift Academy. So by now, it was early February, and this is when America started to see its first significant number of coronavirus cases, and when it was really beginning to make regular news headlines. It was also around then that the government started to discuss a 2-week shutdown of non-essential businesses to stop the spread of the virus and all the stuff you now hear hourly. To say shit hit the fan is an understatement. I know that everyone's been saying it, but 2020 was really going to be my year that made that last 8 years of headache and heartache worthwhile. The fact of the matter is that motorsport is marketing, and when a company doesn't have sales staff in the office to sell product, they potentially don't have customers there to buy the product, they can't get the product from their suppliers, and there's all these restrictions in place to even get staff into the office to perform all these tasks. Absolutely, marketing is going to be the first thing that suffers, which of course is us. So what does that look like for us in the real world? If you imagine all the deals that I had lined up to get the Eurofighter built, probably 90% of those were immediately put on hold. Another deal that I negotiated while I was back home in Australia was for a brand new $100,000 truck. And to say it was life-changing for the few months I had it sitting in my driveway is an absolute understatement. But the thing was, that immediately got recalled. When there was so much uncertainty in the market and the stock market was halving and things like that, this has real repercussions for these companies. And of course, everyone wants to play it safe, so things get recalled, deals get put on hold. It sucks more than words can describe, but motorsport is a knife-edge, high-risk business, and not just because of the time the car spends on track. To add salt to the wound, it wasn't just the car that we didn't have the parts and cash for. I still needed to set up my new team headquarters with all the tools and machinery that we needed to build this new rocket ship. Even with the money I did have, nothing was available. To this day, you still can't buy a grinding mask because they're all getting repurposed as saliva shields. Just being real with you, at this point, things were looking particularly grim. I purposely didn't call any of my prospect partners for 2 whole months because I knew that universally the answer was going to be everything's been put on hold. Around this time, the carbon fiber intake manifold arrived from Performance Design to the guys at Nitrous Outlet to do the plumbing. As crazy as it might sound, even just seeing a small piece of this enormous puzzle come together gave me a small glimmer of hope. One of the great things with this manifold was actually designed in conjunction with the guys from Nitrous Outlet, so it already has the provisions to bolt the nitrous setup straight into it. You've really got to admire the endurance of the guys though, to measure, cut and bend every single tube for every cylinder for the nitrous and the fuel. We sent them off to the powder coater and then had them powder coated the same color red as the intake snout on the carbon upper manifold so that everything matched perfectly. So as the magnitude and severity of the coronavirus situation became apparent, not only in terms of sponsorship deals, but also the availability of supplies as well. Things we normally take for granted, like being able to walk into a steel supply store, grab whatever you need and leave, was not a thing. We really had to start getting creative and fast. We couldn't buy a floor-mounted bandsaw anywhere, so Garrett got creative and disassembled a handheld portable one and made a plate to bench mount it, and away we went. It actually worked out amazing, and it's turned out to be fantastic to cut really intricate pieces. we couldn't buy workbenches, so we had to make our own from scratch. There was literally no welding filler rod available, so we made our own by twisting TIG wire together to enable us to tack them. Fortunately, my neighbour and good mate, who happens to be 8-time world champion top fuel drag racer Tony Schumacher, had some rods, so he parachuted in and donated them to the cause so we could finish the benches after they were tacked.
Get the right shit, just do it.
My man. You can buy an exquisite set of 2-inch stainless steel headers from HGK designed for putting an LS into an E92, but they cost $2,000 US. With the enormous budget cutback, I had to find another way to get the job done. My mates at Texas Speed let me raid their scratch and dent pile of headers down the back of their workshop, and conveniently I found about 8 different designs that I thought I could make work. Keep in mind that an LS comes standard in a Corvette and a BMW E92 are both quite a low profile chassis. We mounted up all of the different headers onto the engine and found a set that were within an inch of being perfect. We tried a highly questionable way of trying to heat up the header and bend it to the angle that we needed, but we threw that idea away pretty quickly and ended up just cutting the collector off and welding a new one on. The best part was Texas Speed just wanted to trade 2 team shirts for those, which might cost us around $30. So all up, this saved $1,970 on its own. Of course, it would be amazing to have the HGK ones, but the reality of the situation is, with that budget deficit, we have to make it up somewhere. And conveniently, the scratch was actually on the collector, which we cut off. And let's be real, unless I had told you that we'd done this, no one would probably have ever known. As I said, at this point I'm already too far down the rabbit hole, so damned if we're not going to find a way to get this thing to the start line. On the same trip, I collected the first of the engines, and I have to say that the quality of that, combined with the performance design, carbon fiber intake, and the nitrous outlet lines, was absolute insanity in real life. I went about installing the Duralast alternator, crank angle sensor, water temperature sensor, and air intake temperature sensor to get it ready to get installed into the car for the first time. Stay tuned for next week's update, where I'll have a whole lot less rambling and a bunch more cool build content for you. As always, hit me with your questions and comments below, and if I could trouble you for a cheeky subscribe, I'd much appreciate it. Stay well.